Hello. Welcome to this masterclass on proving complex construction claims. I'm Tom Lazur and I'm a barrister from Keating Chambers. By the end of this masterclass, you'll have an insight into the way that I as a barrister approach these sorts of claims, and hopefully by the end you'll get an idea of what best practice might be from our perspective of getting from a point where you have a dispute to having a perfectly, hopefully, pleaded case that will then assist in achieving the most advantageous settlement possible. You go duty, breach, causation, loss. That's the mantra that is absolutely drilled into us constantly, and everybody will recognise it who's listening to this. But it's amazing how often people ignore that structure. I mean, at every stage people think, well, if I was taught this on day one of learning about contract and tort law, then how can it still be relevant? It must get more sophisticated as it moves through, but it doesn't. And if you abandon that mantra, that's when you start to get into trouble. Very often I see pleadings that stop at that point, almost as if, well, there's the duty of care, we've got to plead that, so we're going through duty, breach, causation, and loss. The duty is duty to exercise reasonable skill and care. But that doesn't answer the question, what is reasonable? And it's the standard of care, not just the duty, that is important at that stage. And that is that's the real complexity that comes into professional negligence claims. By ignoring the standard of care, you can get into a number of difficulties. Very often the work that we tend to do in these complex construction cases is so focused on breach, less focused on duty. If we focus more on duty, the standard of care in particular, then we'd be on much safer ground. We wouldn't have to have these conversations that we have with the client late in the day, where we have uncertainties over ambiguities of expert evidence. Effectively, breach falls out of it, because if you're saying, well, you need to have, for example, up-to-date knowledge of the latest technologies, all you have to do in your pleading then is to define what the latest technologies in fact were, and the way in which that wasn't applied in the context of the case overall. By going through that process, you know that you're saying to the other side when you present this particular claim, you now have to respond about whether or not you say you owed this duty at all. And if they say, yes, we did owe that duty, then fine, that's fantastic. Breach should just be a question of fact. If they say, no, we didn't owe that duty, then you have a specifically crystallised issue that you can then get your experts to discuss. All of the indications from the court are trying to get you as litigants back to the point of working out what your best case is early on. If you can get the delay expert in first to come up with a case on breach in terms of, when are these areas of delays, what is the disruption, then get the quantum guys to come in and look at that and work together to try and formulate the best possible case, and you plead that properly, you're then forcing the other side to deal with those issues early on. You're then not having to amend later, and you're not in this terrible situation where tens, hundreds of £1,000s are being spent over a case that has been inadequately pleaded in the first case. I do promise that by doing that, you actually maximise the prospects of successfully settling the case. What happens when you sit down and you provide a proper pleading is you get a proper pleading in response that crystallises the issues. And what I then do is I get an Excel spreadsheet and I tabulate all of the issues from the case, the clearly defined issues, and then I allocate those issues to, is that an expert issue? Is it a legal issue for us to resolve? Is it a factual issue for a witness to provide evidence on? And by focusing on only those issues and knowing those issues at the first CMC, you're then in control of the litigation. It's something that, with today's cost controls and things like that, we can have relative certainty as solicitors and barristers as to what something will cost to fight and how many issues are involved. And that is the way that the courts are pushing us. So not only is it better in terms of achieving a better commercial outcome for the client, but it's what the courts want us to do as well.